All men are not created equal. It was a harsh, immutable truth of the world, one that Izuku Midoriya learned far earlier than most. Some people were born with the ability to reshape the earth, to conjure fire from their breath, to soar above the clouds on wings of brilliant plumage. These were the powers of heroes. They were loud, they were bright, and they were fundamentally good. Society had collectively agreed that quirks which could build, protect, or visibly overpower evil were the gold standard of human evolution. But what about the quirks that didn't create? What about the powers that didn't shield, or blast, or fly? What about the powers that reached into the dark, fragile spaces of a person's mind and wrapped their fingers around the steering wheel? Society had a word for those powers, too: villainous. The air in the playground was thick with the suffocating heat of a late summer afternoon. The cicadas screamed from the tree-line, a deafening white noise that did little to drown out the wet, hitching sobs of the small boy cowering in the sandbox. 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya stood between the crying child and his tormentor, his small arms spread wide in a trembling, pathetic barricade, his knees knocked together, his oversized red sneakers shuffling in the sand. Tears pricked the corners of his large, emerald-green eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Standing opposite him was Katsuki Bakugo. Even at 4 years old, Katsuki was a force of nature. He stood with the arrogant swagger of a king surveying his conquered lands, a confident smirk plastered across his face. Small, crackling explosions popped like firecrackers in the palms of his hands, the smell of burnt sugar and ozone heavy in the humid air. Behind him stood 2 lackeys, grinning like hyenas, waiting for their leader to strike. "You're being mean, Kaken!" Izuku's voice wavered, high-pitched and terrified. "See, can't you see he's crying? If you keep going, I'll stop you myself." Katsuki's smirk widened into a feral grin. He slammed his fists together, a sharp crack echoing across the playground. "You stop me? You don't even have a quirk yet, Deku. You're just a useless weakling. What are you gonna do?" Izuku didn't know what he was going to do. He only knew that All Might wouldn't stand by and let someone be hurt. He swallowed the lump of pure terror in his throat, his tiny chest heaving. "I won't let you!" Katsuki lunged. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the arc of Katsuki's fist, the smoke trailing from his knuckles, the malicious glint in his crimson eyes. A sudden, overwhelming surge of panic and desperation erupted in Izuku's chest. It was a physical weight, a hot, coiled spring of emotion that snapped loose in his sternum and rushed upward through his throat. Izuku's eyes locked entirely onto Katsuki's. The explosive boy was staring right at him, his anger mirroring Izuku's terror. For a fraction of a second, their emotions bridged. A connection, invisible but heavy as iron, snapped into place. Izuku didn't think. He just screamed, his voice cracking with desperate authority. "Stop! Leave him alone and walk away." The effect was instantaneous. Katsuki's fist froze merely an inch from Izuku's nose. The crackling explosions in his palms died out with a pathetic sizzle. The aggressive, feral sneer on Katsuki's face vanished, wiped completely clean, replaced by an expression of serene, eerie blankness. Silence slammed down onto the playground. Even the cicadas seemed to have stopped. Izuku blinked, flinching, waiting for the blow. When it didn't come, he slowly opened one eye. Katsuki was standing completely still. His crimson eyes had dilated, and a faint, almost imperceptible rings of emerald-green light swirled within his irises, glowing with a strange, hypnotic luminescence. His posture, usually tense and coiled like a viper, was completely relaxed. "Kaken," Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. Katsuki didn't respond. At least, not with words. Slowly, deliberately, Katsuki lowered his fist. He turned around, his movements fluid and perfectly normal, completely devoid of the robotic stiffness one might expect from someone under mind control. He simply looked like a boy who had abruptly changed his mind. Without looking back, Katsuki walked away. He strolled out of the sandbox, past his slack-jawed cronies, across the grass, and toward the park exit. He didn't say a word. He just left. The 2 boys behind Katsuki stared in absolute horror. They looked at the retreating back of their invincible leader, then slowly turned their gazes back to the frail, trembling green-haired boy in the sandbox. Izuku was staring at his own hands, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He could feel it. Inside his head, there was a strange, vibrating hum, like a plucked guitar string connecting his brain to Katsuki's retreating form. He could feel the exact moment Katsuki reached the edge of the park, and he could feel exactly how to release the string. With a terrified gasp, Izuku blinked hard and mentally let go. Across the park, Katsuki stumbled as if he had walked into an invisible wall. He shook his head violently, looking around in utter bewilderment, his hands sparking wildly. He looked down at his feet, then back toward the sandbox, his face twisting from confusion into pure, unadulterated horror. The two lackeys didn't wait to see what happened next. Screaming about a ghost, a demon, a curse, they turned and fled in the opposite direction. Izuku stood alone in the sandbox with the crying boy. He had won. He had protected him. But as he looked out at Katsuki, who was now staring back at him with a mixture of profound fear and burning rage, Izuku didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a monster. The waiting room of the Musudafa Pediatric Quirk Clinic was painted in cheerful, pastel colors, designed to soothe the nerves of anxious children and their even more anxious parents. Decals of popular heroes, Endeavor, Best Jeanist, and of course, All Might, adorned the walls. Usually Izuku would be bouncing in his seat, reciting the debut dates and special moves of every hero on the posters. Today, he sat frozen on the vinyl chair, his small hands gripping his knees. Beside him, his mother, Inko Midoriya, wrung her hands. Her plump face was pale, drawn tight with worry. She kept glancing down at her son, offering tight, reassuring smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Izuku Midoriya? A nurse called out, popping her head through a wooden door. The doctor will see you now. Inko stood quickly, taking Izuku's small, clammy hand in hers. They were led down a sterile white hallway into an examination room. The room smelled sharp, like rubbing alcohol and latex. A large, complex-looking machine sat in the corner, an MRI scanner specially designed for analyzing the quirk factors in the brain. Dr. Tsubasa, a bald, rotund man with thick glasses and a bushy mustache, sat behind his desk. He was looking over a glowing tablet, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He didn't smile when they entered. Ah, Mrs. Midoriya. Little Izuku. Please take a seat. Inko lifted Izuku onto the examination table before sitting in the chair beside it. Doctor, she started, her voice tight. The preschool called me. They said there was an incident. They said Izuku used a quirk, but they couldn't explain what it was. Is everything okay? Dr. Tsubasa set his tablet down, folding his hands over his stomach. He looked at Izuku, his gaze analytical, almost dissecting. Izuku shrunk under the stare. Physiologically, Izuku is perfectly healthy, Dr. Tsubasa began, his voice measured. He possesses the extra joint in his pinky toe, which usually indicates quirklessness, but as we know, biology is rarely absolute. The brain scans we just took, however, tell a very different story. He tapped a button on his desk, and a holographic projection of a human brain appeared in the air. Different sectors of the brain were highlighted in neon colors. A quirk is a physical ability, tied to our genetics, the doctor explained, pointing a pen at the frontal lobe. For emitter types, the quirk factor is usually located here, regulating the body's energy output. But Izuku's quirk factor is entirely localized in the cerebral cortex and the limbic system, the centers for language, emotion, and cognitive resonance. Inko leaned forward, her brow furrowed. I don't understand. My quirk allows me to attract small objects. My husband can breathe fire. Neither of those are. Genetics can be a fickle lottery, Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa interrupted gently. Sometimes, quirks mutate. They combine in ways we cannot predict. Your husband emits energy. You pull things toward you. In a heavily mutated abstract sense, Izuku has inherited both traits. But instead of breathing fire or pulling toys, he emits a neurological frequency that pulls on the minds of others. The room grew very quiet. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed to amplify. We have tentatively classified his quirk as commanding resonance, the doctor continued, his tone turning grave. It is a form of cognitive override. Mind control, Inko gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mind control? But how? Based on the school's report and the neural pathways we're seeing, it's not a simple switch, Dr. Tsubasa explained. He turned his chair, looking directly at Izuku. Izuku, when you made Katsuki walk away, what were you feeling? Izuku flinched, looking down at his red shoes. I was scared, he mumbled. I wanted him to stop so bad. I looked at his eyes, and I felt like there was a string between us. And I just told him to go. The doctor nodded slowly. Exactly? Resonance. Unlike standard brainwashing quirks recorded in medical history, which usually require a verbal response or physical contact, Izuku's quirk seems to require an emotional bridge. Eye contact, active listening, or a sudden spike in shared emotion. Once that bridge is formed, if Izuku issues a command, the target's brain receives it not as an external order, but as an absolute, overriding internal desire. So, he makes people do what he wants? Inko asked, her voice trembling. Yes. But it is much more complex than that, Dr. Tsubasa said, zooming in on the brain hologram. Most mind control quirks shut down the victim's higher brain functions. They turn people into sluggish zombies. But Izuku's quirk leaves the victim's cognitive faculties intact. When he told the Bakugo boy to walk away, the boy didn't stumble blindly. He retained his balance, his spatial awareness, his intelligence. The quirk simply hijacked his free will and replaced his primary objective with Izuku's command. Dr. Tsubasa paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. He took off his glasses, wiping them with a cloth from his pocket. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy, carrying an unmistakable undertone of warning. Mrs. Midoriya. This is a very potent ability. A frightening one. The ability to subvert another human being's free will, while leaving their skills and intelligence perfectly intact, is something society does not take lightly. In the wrong hands, a quirk like this could orchestrate catastrophes without the user ever lifting a finger. My son is not a villain! Inko snapped. The sudden ferocity in her voice startled Izuku. Her tears were gone, replaced by the fierce, protective glare of a mother bear. He loves heroes. He wants to save people. He used it today to stop a bully from hurting another child. That's a hero's heart, Dr. Tsubasa. The doctor held up his hands placatingly. I am not accusing the boy, Mrs. Midoriya. I am merely preparing you. The world is rarely kind to things it does not understand, and it is entirely unforgiving to things it fears. A quirk that steals autonomy. People will look at him differently. The Hero Public Safety Commission keeps very strict tabs on individuals with psychological quirks of this magnitude. He will need to be careful. Very, very careful. Izuku sat on the table, feeling cold to his bones. He looked at the All Might poster on the wall. The symbol of peace was smiling, pointing a finger outward with the caption, I am here. But as Izuku looked at the poster, he didn't feel safe. He wondered if All Might would smile at him if he knew what was inside Izuku's head. Would All Might look at him with the same fear that Katsuki had? Would the symbol of peace see a hero, or a threat? The shift in the neighborhood was not sudden. It was a creeping rot. News travels fast in a suburban community, especially news concerning the Golden Child, Katsuki Bakugo, and the previously quirkless Izuku Midoriya. Mitsuki Bakugo had been furious when Katsuki came home, trembling and refusing to speak about what had happened. When the preschool teachers explained the situation to the parents, the whispers began. It started at the grocery store. Inko would be squeezing tomatoes, and Izuku would notice the other mothers at the end of the aisle. They would stop talking, shoot wide-eyed, nervous glances at him, and hurriedly push their carts in the opposite direction. Then, it was the playground. Izuku tried to go to the swings, but the moment his red shoes touched the sand, parents began calling their children away. Come here, Hiroshi. It's time to go home. But Mom, I just got here. I said now, Hiroshi. Don't look at that boy. At preschool, the teachers treated him as if he were made of unexploded dynamite. If Izuku so much as raised his voice during playtime, the teachers would flinch, their eyes darting to his face, terrified of seeing that ethereal green glow. When they spoke to him, they avoided his eyes. They gave him whatever he wanted, not out of kindness, but out of a desperate desire to placate him so he wouldn't use his power on them. The isolation was immediate, absolute, and suffocating. Izuku didn't understand. He had stopped Katsuki. He had saved the other boy. Wasn't that what heroes did? When All Might punched a villain, people cheered. When Endeavor burned a criminal, people clapped. Why were they running away from him? He hadn't hurt anyone. Katsuki hadn't even got a bruise. He spent his afternoon sitting alone on his bedroom floor, surrounded by his hero action figures. He would make them fight, mimicking the battles he saw on TV, but increasingly, he found himself pausing. He looked at his hands. They were small, soft, and unscarred. They didn't produce fire. They didn't explode. They just commanded. He needed to talk to Katsuki. They had been friends once. Before the quirks manifested, before the hierarchy was established, Izuku needed to explain that he hadn't meant to do it, that he wasn't going to do it again. He needed his friend back. A week after the incident, Izuku found Katsuki down by the riverbank. It was a place they used to explore together, skipping stones and catching crayfish in plastic buckets. Katsuki was standing near the edge of the water, throwing rocks into the current with unnecessary violence. Every time a rock hit the water, a small explosion from his palm would send a spray of water into the air. Izuku stood at the top of the grassy embankment, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He took a deep breath, clutching the straps of his yellow backpack, and began to descend. Keikaken? Katsuki froze. The rock in his hand slipped from his fingers, splashing harmlessly into the water. For a moment he didn't turn around. His shoulders were incredibly stiff, the muscles in his small back coiled tight. Slowly, Katsuki turned his head. His eyes, usually burning with arrogant fire, were shadowed. When he saw it was just Izuku, his expression morphed into a vicious, defensive scowl. "What do you want, Deku?" Katsuki spat, though his voice lacked its usual booming volume. There was a slight tremor in his tone. Izuku stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. I wanted to say sorry. For the playground. Katsuki's eye twitched. Shut up. I didn't know I could do that, Izuku pleaded, taking another step forward. I didn't want to make you do anything. I was just scared, and my quirk. I said shut up. Katsuki whirled around, a massive explosion erupting from his right hand. The blast kicked up dirt and grass, sending Izuku stumbling backward, landing hard on his bottom. The smell of caramel and smoke filled the air. Katsuki stood over him, breathing heavily, his fists clenched at his sides. Small, residual sparks popped over his knuckles. But he didn't attack. He didn't lunge. He stood exactly where he was, his eyes locked onto the ground, purposefully refusing to look at Izuku's face. Don't talk about it, Katsuki hissed, his voice vibrating with a mixture of profound humiliation and rage. Don't you ever talk about it. Kaken, please. You think you're better than me now? Katsuki yelled, his voice finally cracking. You think because you played a dirty trick, you're stronger than me? You're not. I have an amazing quirk. I'm going to be the #1 hero. You're just a creepy, sneaky little bastard. Izuku stared at him, tears welling in his eyes. He realized then what Katsuki was doing. He was avoiding eye contact. Katsuki, the bravest, most fearless boy Izuku knew, was terrified of looking at him. The realization broke Izuku's heart. I don't think I'm better than you, Izuku cried. I want to be a hero too. We can still. A hero? Katsuki let out a harsh, barking laugh, though it sounded hollow. Finally, he lifted his head, glaring at a spot just to the left of Izuku's ear. You! A hero? Heroes don't sneak into people's brains, Deku. Heroes fight face to face. They use strength. What you did, it was disgusting. Katsuki's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. When you did that, I couldn't stop. My brain was screaming at me to hit you, but my body just turned around. It was like I wasn't even there. You erased me, Izuku gasped, a cold dread washing over him. No, I didn't. I didn't mean to. That's a villain's quirk, Deku. The words struck Izuku like a physical blow. The air rushed out of his lungs. Katsuki took a step backward, putting distance between them. Only a villain takes away someone's freedom like that. You're never going to be a hero. You're a freak. And if you ever tried to use that trick on me again, I'll burn you to ash before you can even open your mouth." Katsuki turned on his heel. He didn't run, his pride wouldn't allow it, but he walked away quickly, aggressively kicking a stray kin into the river. Izuku sat in the grass for a long, long time. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The river babbled softly beside him, indifferent to the shattering of his childhood. A villain's quirk. The words echoed in his mind, wrapping around his heart like barbed wire. Society feared him. His preschool teachers feared him. His best friend feared him. If everyone looked at him and saw a villain, was it only a matter of time before he became one? The house was quiet when Izuku finally walked through the front door. Inko had been pacing the living room, her face tight with worry. When she saw him, covered in dirt and grass stains, she rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling him into a desperate hug. "Izuku! Oh, thank goodness! Where were you? I was so worried." Izuku didn't hug her back. His arms hung limply at his sides. "Mom," he whispered, his voice startlingly empty. "Am I a bad person?" Inko pulled back, her eyes wide. She looked at his tear-stained face, at the deadened look in his normally bright green eyes, and her heart shattered. "No," she said fiercely, grabbing his shoulders. "No, Izuku. You are a wonderful, sweet boy." "Kaken said I have a villain's quirk," Izuku said, a single tear spilling over his eyelashes. "He said I take away people's freedom. He said it was disgusting." Inko sucked in a breath, a flash of pure anger toward the Bakugo boy crossing her features, but she quickly suppressed it. She pulled Izuku to the couch, sitting him down, and kneeling on the floor in front of him so they were at eye level. "Izuku, listen to me," she said, her voice steady and commanding in a way he rarely heard. "A quirk is just a tool. It is like a knife. A knife can be used by a chef to make a beautiful dinner, or it can be used by a bad person to hurt someone. The knife doesn't decide what it is. The person holding it does." Izuku sniffled, looking down at his lap. "But nobody likes my knife." Inko reached out, gently lifting his chin so he had to look at her. "Then you have to show them that they have nothing to fear. You have to prove to them that you are the chef. Do you still want to be a hero?" Izuku hesitated. He looked past his mother, toward the hallway leading to his bedroom. He could see the edge of an All Might poster through the cracked door. Could he be a hero? Could he stand in the light when his power belonged in the shadows? "Yes," he whispered. "Then you will be," Inko said, kissing his forehead. "You will have to work harder than anyone else. You will have to be kinder than anyone else. Because you have the power to take control, you must be the master of yourself first." Later that night, Izuku stood in the dark of his bedroom. The only light came from the street lamp outside his window, casting long, distorted shadows across his floor. He had taken down some of the All Might posters. The booming, smiling, explosive heroes didn't make sense to him anymore. They were like Katsuki. They relied on overwhelming physical force. Izuku walked over to the full-length mirror attached to his closet door. He looked at his reflection. A small, frail boy with a mess of untamable green hair, freckles dusting his cheeks, and wide, innocent eyes. He didn't look scary. Izuku leaned closer to the glass. He needed to understand this. He needed to know his own weapon inside and out. Dr. Tsubasa had said the quirk required an emotional bridge. Izuku stared into his own reflection's eyes. He thought about the fear on the playground. He thought about the anger in Katsuki's voice. He felt a swell of profound sadness and determination bubble up in his chest. He locked eyes with himself, feeling that strange, heavy vibration begin to hum at the base of his skull. The eyes in the mirror began to change. The irises, normally a flat forest green, began to swirl. A ring of brilliant, luminescent emerald light ignited within them, glowing with an otherworldly, hypnotic power. Izuku felt the string connect. He had linked with himself. The feeling was dizzying. It was like standing on two sides of a room at once. He was the commander, and he was the soldier. He could feel the absolute authority in his own mind, a psychic weight pressing down on his own consciousness. He took a breath and whispered his first deliberate command. "Lift your right hand." It wasn't a physical effort. Izuku didn't use his muscles to move his arm. Instead, his brain simply accepted the command as an absolute, undeniable truth. Without him actively willing it, his right arm smoothly and perfectly raised into the air, his palm pressing against the cool glass of the mirror, he didn't feel sluggish. He didn't feel asleep. He just felt an overwhelming compulsion to obey his own voice. Lower it. The hand dropped. Izuku broke the connection, gasping for air as the glowing rings in his eyes faded. He stumbled backward, falling onto his bed. His heart was hammering. It was terrifying. The sheer ease with which he could hijack a human body. Katsuki was right. It was a violation. To reach into someone's mind and steal the very thing that made them human. It was an appalling power. But as Izuku sat in the dark, his mother's words echoed in his ears. The knife doesn't decide what it is. The person holding it does. Izuku pulled his knees to his chest. If he was going to be a hero, he could not be a brute. He could not rely on his quirk to force people into submission just because it was easy. If he did, he really would become a villain. Right then and there, in the quiet solitude of his bedroom, 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya made a vow. He swore it to the shadows, to the silent action figures, to the moon outside his window. He would never, ever use his quirk to strip someone of their free will maliciously. He would not use it to cheat. He would not use it out of anger. He would only use it to save, to protect, and to guide. But a quirk that didn't physically fight back against villains was a liability in the field. If he was going to face down monsters made of sludge, fire, and steel, a voice wouldn't be enough. He needed more. He couldn't just be a voice. He had to be a weapon himself. The path of the tactician began the very next day. Izuku asked his mother for a notebook. Inko, expecting him to draw pictures of heroes, bought him a standard, lined school journal. Instead of drawing, Izuku began to write. His first entry was not about a hero. It was about his own quirk. Commanding resonance, he wrote at the top of the page in sloppy, childish kanji. Rule 1. Requires emotional connection. Eye contact, strong feelings, listening. Rule 2. Victim keeps their skills. They aren't zombies. Rule 3. I have to know what I want them to do. He realized quickly that to control a situation, he had to understand the people in it. Over the next few years, Izuku's room transformed. The hero posters were pushed aside to make room for quirk boards. He began to obsessively analyze quirks, watching news footage of villain attacks not with the wide-eyed wonder of a fan, but with the sharp, calculating gaze of a chess master. By the time he was 7, he had filled 5 notebooks. Hero analysis for the future. He didn't just document what heroes did, he documented why they did it. He studied their reaction times. He analyzed the villain's mistakes. He began reading books far above his reading level, books on psychology, behavioral science, body language, and negotiation. He learned about micro-expressions. He learned how to tell when someone was terrified, when they were bluffing, and when they were about to strike. He realized that his quirk wasn't just magic. It was a psychological tether. To use it perfectly, he had to be able to read his target's mind before he ever opened his mouth. But reading minds wouldn't stop a fist. When Izuku was 8, he sat at the dinner table across from his mother. He had grown a little taller, but his eyes had lost their childish naivety. They were sharp, constantly moving, calculating everything. "Mom," Izuku said quietly, setting his chopsticks down. "I want to take martial arts classes." Inko blinked in surprise. "Martial arts? Like karate? Mixed martial arts? Judo? Aikido? Anything that focuses on redirection and grappling," Izuku corrected, his voice entirely too serious for an 8-year-old. "My quirk is mental. If I fight a villain whose mind I can't connect with, or who is too fast, I will die. I need to be able to fight without my quirk. I need my body to be a weapon, so my mind can be the shield." Inko stared at her son. She saw the absolute, unyielding determination in his eyes. She saw the vow he had made to himself. She didn't argue. She nodded. The physical training was brutal. Izuku was small for his age, naturally lacking in muscle mass. The dojo he joined was filled with kids who had physical quirks, boys with hardened skin, girls with enhanced reflexes. Izuku was thrown to the mats, bruised, battered, and beaten down day after day, but he never quit. Every time he hit the mat, he analyzed his opponent's footing. Every time he was pinned, he noted the shift in their body weight. He learned how to fall without breaking bones. He learned how to use a larger opponent's momentum against them. He learned that a fight was not just about strength, it was a conversation of violence, and Izuku was learning the vocabulary. At school, the isolation continued. He was the ghost of Aldera Junior High. The students whispered about the mind freak, the kid who could turn you into his puppet if you looked at him too long. Katsuki, who had grown into a volatile, explosive teenager, ignored him completely, treating Izuku like a repulsive insect that wasn't worth squashing. Izuku let them whisper. He kept his head down, his mouth shut, and his eyes on his notebooks. He didn't use his quirk once throughout all of elementary and most of middle school. He kept the monster locked in a cage, feeding it only discipline and knowledge. He watched the world. He analyzed every quirk, every weakness, every human flaw. He mapped out the human mind like a battlefield. Society had told him he was a villain. They had looked at his power and seen a tyrant. But Izuku Midoriya was not a tyrant. He was a tactician. He was a survivor. And as he closed his 13th notebook, preparing for his final year of middle school, he knew he was ready. He didn't need to be born with the power to punch through buildings to be a hero. He just needed to be smarter than everyone else in the room. He would step into the light, and he would force the world to see that true heroism didn't come from a quirk. It came from the heart. And when the time came, his voice would not be the command of a villain. It would be the resonance of a hero. Aldera Junior High was a microcosm of society at large, loud, hierarchical, and deeply prejudiced. Izuku Midoriya, now 14 years old, sat at his desk in the back corner of the classroom, an island of absolute stillness in a sea of adolescent chaos, while his classmates threw crumpled paper, shouted across the aisles, and casually showed off their quirks. Izuku remained hunched over his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. His pencil scratched rapidly across the page, breaking down the biomechanics of the new rookie hero, Empty Lady. Physically, Izuku had changed significantly since he was 4. He was no longer the soft, frail boy who cried in the sandbox. 10 years of rigorous, grueling martial arts training had forged him into something lean and tightly coiled. Beneath his standard black middle school uniform, his muscles were dense and defined, built for speed, leverage, and endurance rather than bulky showmanship. He held himself differently, too. He sat with his spine perfectly straight, his feet planted firmly on the floor, a grappler's resting stance. His eyes, once wide and weeping, were now sharp, analytical, and constantly tracking the micro-movements of everyone in the room. But socially, nothing had changed. He was still a pariah. Since you're all third years, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. The homeroom teacher announced, standing at the podium with a stack of career aptitude forms. He smiled indulgently at the class. But let's be honest. You're all aiming for the hero course, aren't you? The classroom erupted into cheers. Students leaped onto their desks, showing off glowing hands, stretching necks, and minor telekinesis. Izuku didn't cheer. He simply kept writing, his face an unreadable mask. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher chuckled, gathering the papers and casually tossing them into the air, an act of performative dismissal. But remember, using your powers at school is against the rules. Hey, teach! Don't lump me in with these background characters. The arrogant, booming voice cut through the noise like a chainsaw. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet propped up on his desk. He wore a smirk that was equal parts confidence and cruelty. Small, controlled explosions popped like firecrackers in the palm of his hand. I'm going to Yui High School. I aced the mock test. I'm the only one here with the stuff to surpass All Might and become the top hero, the class murmured, a mix of annoyance and awe. Katsuki was a prodigy. He had the power, the grades, and the sheer, unstoppable drive. The teacher adjusted his glasses, looking at his clipboard. Ah, yes. Bakugo, you are going for UA. And oh, Midoriya. You're also applying for UA, aren't you? The silence that fell over the classroom was instantaneous and suffocating. All eyes snapped to the back corner. The playful atmosphere vanished, replaced by a thick, palpable tension. Students physically leaned away from Izuku's desk. Izuku stopped writing. He didn't look up, but his grip on his pencil tightened fractionally. Midoriya? One of the students whispered loudly. Is he insane? The mind freak at UA? Another muttered. They'd never let him in. He's practically a villain already. Katsuki's feet slammed onto the floor. He stood up, turning slowly to glare at Izuku. The air around him practically shimmered with heat. Deku, he growled, the nickname rolling off his tongue with 10 years of practiced venom. What the hell do you think you're doing? Izuku calmly placed his pencil down. He closed his notebook. He looked up, his expression completely blank. He didn't lock eyes with Katsuki. He was very careful never to do that in public anymore. Instead, he fixed his gaze on the bridge of Katsuki's nose. Yui doesn't have a rule against my quirk, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice quiet, steady, and perfectly controlled. There's no precedent saying I can't apply. You think you can rub shoulders with the best? Katsuki shouted, slamming his hand onto Izuku's desk. An explosion detonated, scorching the wood and sending a wave of heat washing over Izuku's face. Izuku didn't flinch. He simply let the smoke clear, his breathing even. You've got a quirk for brainwashing thugs, not fighting. You think staring at a robot is gonna save your life in the entrance exam? You're a liability, Deku. Stay in your lane before somebody puts you down for good. Izuku looked at the scorched desk, then calmly picked up his notebook, dusting the ash off the cover. Noted. Thank you for your concern, Kaken. The absolute lack of emotional reaction infuriated Katsuki more than a scream ever could. He sneered, a sound of pure disgust, and shoved his hands into his pockets, turning away. The rest of the class let out a collective breath. The crisis had been averted. When the bell finally rang, Izuku packed his bag with methodical precision. He was used to the whispers. Villain. Freak. Puppet master. He had spent 10 years building a fortress in his mind, walling off the hurt, focusing entirely on his goal. He knew his quirk was terrifying. He knew he had to be better than perfect to prove he wasn't a monster. He left the school through the back gate to avoid the crowds, taking a shortcut toward his house. His mind was already turning over the problem Katsuki had accurately pointed out. The UA entrance exam was historically biased toward physical, flashy quirks. Mostly it involved fighting robots. His quirk, commanding resonance, required an emotional, psychological connection. You couldn't form a psychological bridge with a hunk of metal. I'll need support gear, Izuku thought, walking into the cool shadow of a concrete underpass. Maybe a capture weapon like Eraserheads? If I can immobilize the robots physically, I won't need to. A wet, sickening gurgle echoed through the tunnel. Izuku stopped. His martial arts instincts kicked in instantly. His weight shifted to his back foot, his body turning sideways to present a smaller target, his hands coming up to guard his face. He scanned the shadows. From the manhole cover a few feet away, a massive, putrid wave of dark green sludge erupted. It smelled like raw sewage and rotting garbage. The sludge twisted and coalesced, forming a towering, amorphous mound of liquid muscle. Two massive, bulbous eyes and a jagged mouth materialized in the center of the muck. A medium-sized meat suit. The sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and heavy. Perfect. I need a place to hide for a while. The villain lunged. Izuku didn't freeze. He didn't scream. His mind snapped into a terrifyingly calm state of hyperanalysis. Fluid-based body composition. No solid striking points. Grappling is impossible. Blunt force trauma will be absorbed. Escaping is the only viable physical option. Izuku pivoted on his heel, sprinting toward the exit of the tunnel. But he was only human, and the sludge was incredibly fast. A whip-like tendril of slime wrapped around his ankle, yanking him backward with bone-jarring force. Izuku hit the concrete hard, the breath driven from his lungs. Before he could recover, the sludge was on him. It poured over his arms, pinning them to his sides, and then, the horror began. The villain forced itself into Izuku's nose and mouth. Don't fight it, kid, the villain hissed, the sludge forcing its way down Izuku's windpipe. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then, it'll all be over. Thanks for the body. You're my hero, Izuku choked. He couldn't breathe. The sludge was expanding in his lungs, burning like acid. His vision began to swim with black spots. Panic, raw and primal, clawed at his chest. I'm going to die, he realized. He stared up at the villain's massive, watery eyes. He felt the familiar, heavy vibration beginning to hum at the base of his skull. The emotional bridge was forming rapidly, fueled by his desperate will to live and the villain's sadistic triumph. He could use it. He could force the villain out. No! Izuku's internal voice screamed. If I use it in self-defense, unregulated, without a license, they'll label me a villain. They'll lock me up. His vow held him back. The agonizing constraint of being a heroic mind controller. His vision faded to a pinpoint. He was losing consciousness. Just as the darkness threatened to consume him completely, the manhole cover clattered across the pavement. A massive, shadowy figure stepped into the tunnel. The presence of the man was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Have no fear, you are safe, a voice boomed, echoing off the concrete walls with impossible resonance. Now. Because I am here. The sludge villain panicked, whipping a tendril toward the newcomer. The man pulled back a massive fist. The air pressure in the tunnel visibly distorted, pulling inward before exploding outward. Texas smash. The force of the punch didn't just hit the villain, it hit the air itself. A localized hurricane erupted in the confined space. The sheer wind pressure ripped the sludge away from Izuku, splattering the villain into a million harmless droplets against the walls. Izuku hit the ground, gasping violently for air, coughing up foul-tasting slime. He rolled onto his side, his vision blurring, trying to focus on the impossible mountain of muscle standing before him. The blonde hair, the golden age costume, the brilliant, unflinching smile. All might. Izuku's eyes rolled back, and he passed out. Hey! Hey! Wake up! A large, calloused hand was gently tapping his cheek. Izuku gasped, his eyes snapping open. He scrambled backward, dropping into a defensive crouch, before his brain registered who was standing over him. All Might. The #1 hero. The symbol of peace. Excellent! I thought we'd lost you there. All Might boomed, his hands on his hips. I apologize for getting you caught up in my villain hunt. But thanks to you, he is safely contained. All Might held up 2 large soda bottles, completely filled with the green sludge. Izuku was hyperventilating, but not from the attack. He was standing in front of his idol. The man whose videos he had watched thousands of times. The man who embodied everything Izuku wanted to be. I need your autograph. Izuku stammered, frantically patting down his pockets until he found his notebook. He flipped it open, only to find All Might's sprawling, massive signature already taking up 2 full pages. He already did it. Thank you? It will be a family heirloom. Well, I must be off, All Might said, turning toward the street. Pro-heroes are constantly fighting time as well as enemies. Wait, Izuku thought, panic seizing him. He can't leave yet. I have to ask him. I have to know. Wait. All Might. Izuku called out. I have a question. It's really important. Sorry, boy. No time for QA. All Might bent his knees, the concrete cracking beneath his boots. With a massive boom, he launched himself into the air, flying like a rocket toward the city skyline. It wasn't until All Might was 100 feet in the air that he realized the extra weight clinging to his leg. Hey, hey, hey! What do you think you're doing? All Might yelled, looking down to see Izuku desperately clinging to his thigh, the wind whipping his face. Let go! I love my fans, but this is too much. If I let go now, I'll die. Izuku screamed over the rushing wind. Oh. Good point. All Might grabbed Izuku by the collar, scanning the area. They were flying over the commercial district. He spotted a tall, flat-roofed office building and altered his trajectory, landing with a heavy thud that shook the rooftop. Izuku collapsed onto the gravel, his legs turning to jelly. He was panting, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his ribs. That was terrifying, Izuku gasped. Not a very smart move, young man, All Might scolded, though his voice lacked its usual booming volume. In fact, he sounded strained. If you knock on the door downstairs, I'm sure they'll let you out. Now I really must. All Might suddenly hunched over. A violent, wet cough tore from his throat, and a spray of blood splattered against the gravel. Izuku screamed. All Might! Are you bleeding? A thick cloud of steam suddenly erupted from the hero's body, enveloping him completely. Izuku stumbled back, coughing, waving the smoke away. What's happening? Did you use too much power? When the steam cleared, the towering, invincible symbol of peace was gone. In his place stood a skeletal man. He was shockingly thin, his skin hanging loosely on his frame. He wore clothes several sizes too big for him. His eyes were sunken deep into their sockets, burning with a weary, hollow light. Izuku stared, his analytical mind short-circuiting. You're a fake. An imposter. I assure you, I am All Might, the skeletal man sighed, wiping a trail of blood from his chin. He walked over to the edge of the roof, slumping against the railing. He pulled up his oversized white shirt, revealing a horrific, jagged scar that covered the entire left side of his chest. It looked like a spiderweb of destroyed tissue. 5 years ago, All Might said quietly, his voice a raspy shadow of its former glory. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and my stomach was removed. I've had countless surgeries. Right now, I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I look like this. Izuku was horrified. 5 years ago? Was that the fight with Toxic Chainsaw? You know your stuff, kid, but no. That punk couldn't bring me down. I asked that this fight be kept under wraps. All Might sighed, looking out over the city. The symbol of peace cannot be daunted by evil. I smiled to show the pressure of heroes, and to trick the fear inside of me. I'm just a man with a quirk, running on fumes. He turned to look at Izuku. So you saw my secret. Don't post it online. Now, what was your question? Izuku swallowed hard. The reality of his idol was devastating, but in a way, it made All Might seem even more incredible. He was broken, hurting, and he still pushed through the pain to save people. My quirk, Izuku started, his voice trembling slightly. This was it. The moment of truth. People say I have a villain's quirk. I have the power to control minds. All Might's eyebrows raised in surprise. Mind control? That is a very rare and potent ability. It requires emotional resonance, Izuku explained, the clinical terminology masking his anxiety. If I connect with someone, I can issue a command. It overwrites their free will completely, but they don't turn into zombies. They retain all their skills and intelligence to carry out the order. They just have to do it. Izuku stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. Everyone is afraid of me. They think I'm going to turn evil because taking away free will is wrong. Even my best friend hates me because of it. I've spent my whole life training my body so I wouldn't have to rely on it. But I want to save people. He looked up, tears finally breaking free, trailing down his cheeks. Can someone with a quirk that steals freedom still be a hero like you? All Might looked at the trembling boy. He saw the desperation, the pure, unadulterated hope hanging on his answer. But All Might was a pragmatist. He had seen the darkest parts of society. He had fought villains with psychological quirks, and he knew the devastation they caused. Young man, All Might said softly. The life of a pro-hero is not just about fighting villains. It's about inspiring hope. A hero's job is to make people feel safe. When people look at you, they need to feel that their lives are their own, and that you are there to protect them. All Might looked away, staring down at the streets below. A quirk that forces compliance. It inspires fear, not hope. To be a pro-hero, you must face incredible danger, but you also must face the court of public opinion. If you take control of a villain, people will wonder if you take control of civilians, too. They will never fully trust you. Izuku's breath hitched. The words were cutting deeper than any knife. I admire your spirit, All Might continued, turning back to him, his sunken eyes filled with genuine pity. The fact that you trained your body to avoid using it shows you have a good heart. But pro-heroes put their lives on the line. If you can't use your quirk without causing terror, and you try to fight quirkless, you will die. He pushed himself off the railing. It's not bad to dream. But you have to consider what's realistic. You could be a police officer. They coordinate with heroes, and your analytical skills would be highly valued in interrogation or crisis negotiation. It's honorable work. All Might walked past Izuku, heading for the rooftop access door. I'm sorry, kid. But no. I don't think you can be a pro-hero with a power like that. The door clicked shut. Izuku stood completely alone on the rooftop. The wind whipped his green hair around his face. He felt entirely numb. The symbol of peace had just confirmed what Katsuki, the teachers, and society had been telling him his entire life. His quirk was a curse. He was fundamentally incompatible with heroism. Suddenly, a massive explosion shook the ground beneath his feet. Izuku jumped, running to the railing. Several blocks away, in the middle of a dense shopping district, a massive pillar of black smoke was billowing into the sky. Fire licked at the sides of the buildings. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Without thinking, driven by years of ingrained habit, Izuku ran for the stairs. He needed to see what was happening. He needed to analyze the villain, to watch the hero's work. It was the only way he knew how to cope with the shattering of his dream. By the time Izuku arrived at the shopping district, it was a war zone. A massive crowd of onlookers was kept back by police barricades. The heat was unbearable, rolling off the burning storefronts in oppressive waves. Shards of glass littered the street. Izuku pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his eyes wide. In the center of the devastation was the sludge villain. How? Izuku's mind raced. All Might put him in the bottles. Did he drop them? Did I cause him to drop them when I grabbed his leg? The guilt slammed into him like a freight train. This is my fault. The villain had grown even larger, completely engulfing a narrow alleyway between two burning buildings. It was whipping its sludge tendrils wildly, tearing down street lamps and smashing windows. The roaring flames surrounding the alley created a furnace, feeding off the destruction. Several pro-heroes were on the scene, but they were paralyzed. Death Arms, a man with incredible physical strength, tried to punch the villain. His fist sank harmlessly into the muck, and he was thrown back. I can't get a grip on him. It's like punching pudding. Kamui Woods, a hero with a wood-based quirk, couldn't get close. My wood will ignite in this heat. The fire is too strong. Empty Lady, the giant rookie hero, was standing awkwardly at the entrance to the street. I need at least a two-lane road to maneuver. I can't fit down that alley. They were waiting. They were all waiting for someone with a suitable quirk to arrive. Why aren't they doing anything? A civilian next to Izuku muttered. The villain has a hostage. Izuku's blood ran cold. He looked closer, peering through the smoke and the thrashing green sludge. Deep within the center of the monster, thrashing wildly, was a boy. Blonde, spiky hair. Crimson eyes wide with unadulterated panic. Small, desperate explosions popping helplessly from his submerged hands. Kaken. Izuku stopped breathing. Katsuki Bakugo, the strongest boy he knew, the prodigy who was destined to be number one, was suffocating. He was dying. Izuku's analytical mind went into overdrive, processing the battlefield in microseconds. Physical force is useless against a fluid body. Fire makes approach impossible for rescue personnel. The villain is agitated, adrenaline running high, using the hostage's explosions as a deterrent. Estimated time until Katsuki loses consciousness, 60 seconds. Estimated time until brain death, 4 minutes. The heroes were doing nothing. They were waiting. But Katsuki didn't have time to wait. All Might's words echoed in Izuku's head. It inspires fear, not hope. You will die. Izuku looked at Katsuki's eyes. They were wide, darting around wildly, looking for help. They locked onto Izuku in the crowd. In that singular fraction of a second, Izuku didn't see the bully who had tormented him for 10 years. He didn't see the boy who had called him a villain. He just saw a kid who was terrified, drowning in the dark, begging for someone to save him. Izuku didn't make a conscious decision to move. His legs acted on their own. He ducked under the police tape. Hey! Kid! Get back here! A police officer yelled, reaching for him. Izuku ignored him. He sprinted into the clearing, sprinting directly toward the raging inferno. The heat was blistering, singeing his eyelashes and the fabric of his uniform. The pro-heroes shouted at him to stop, but they were too slow to catch him. Deku? Katsuki thought, his mind sluggish from the lack of oxygen. What the hell is he doing? The sludge villain noticed the boy running toward him and laughed, a wet, gargling sound. You again? Coming to offer me a better meat suit? The villain reared back, raising a massive tendril of sludge, preparing to slam it down and crush Izuku into the pavement. Izuku slid to a halt just 10 feet away from the monster. He didn't take a fighting stance. He didn't raise his fists. He stood perfectly straight, dropping his backpack to the ground. He looked up, bypassing the thrashing sludge, bypassing the flames, and locked his eyes directly onto the massive, bulbous eyes of the villain. Rule 1. Emotional resonance. The villain was riding a high of sadistic joy, adrenaline, and arrogance. Izuku needed to match it, to overpower it. He dug deep into his own chest, pulling up every ounce of terror, desperation, and raw, untamed fury he possessed. He thought of the suffocating feeling in the tunnel. He thought of his mother crying. He thought of 10 years of being called a monster. He focused all of it into a piercing, unyielding glare. It was a look of absolute, terrifying authority. The villain paused, the sludge tendril hanging in the air. For a split second, the monster felt a strange, cold shiver run down its non-existent spine. It looked into the boy's eyes, and in that moment, the emotional bridge snapped into place. It felt like a steel cable wrapping around the villain's brain stem. Izuku's eyes flared. The emerald green of his irises ignited, glowing with a brilliant, supernatural light that cut through the smoke and the fire. The vibration in his skull became a roar. He opened his mouth, and his voice tore through the alley. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a strange, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in the chest of everyone who heard it. Let him go and freeze. The alley went dead silent. The roaring of the flames seemed to dull. The shouts of the heroes ceased. The sludge villain's massive, watery eyes dilated instantly. The pupils shrank, and the whites of its eyes were suddenly overtaken by a swirling, hypnotic green glow, an exact mirror of Izuku's eyes. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The villain's body spasmed. The tendril that was poised to crush Izuku halted in midair, rigid as a steel beam. The villain did not collapse into a puddle. Its intelligence and physical form were locked into place, its entire being hijacked by the singular, overwhelming command. With a wet, tearing sound, the sludge surrounding Katsuki violently parted. It peeled backward, rejecting the hostage like a body rejecting a splinter. Katsuki fell forward, hitting the asphalt on his hands and knees. He gasped violently, hacking up sludge and coughing as sweet, cool oxygen flooded his burning lungs. The sludge villain remained perfectly, horrifyingly still, towering over them like a grotesque statue. The crowd was utterly silent. The pro-heroes stared in disbelief. A 14-year-old boy with no physical enhancements had just completely neutralized a villain that had stalled 4 professionals, simply by speaking a 6-word sentence. Izuku stood his ground, maintaining the eye contact. The strain of holding a creature with an amorphous brain structure was immense. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his jaw clenched tight. The psychic pressure was giving him a massive migraine, but he didn't blink. He couldn't. Kaken, Izuku said, his voice strained, never breaking eye contact with the villain. Move. Katsuki looked up, coughing, his eyes wide. He looked at the frozen monster, then at Izuku. He saw the glowing green eyes, the terrifying, absolute control Izuku was wielding. It was the same power that had terrified him on the playground 10 years ago, but now, it was magnified 100-fold. Katsuki scrambled backward, away from the villain, until he bumped into the legs of Death Arms. The spell broke. Death Arms shook his head, snapping out of his stupor. Secure the villain! He roared. Kamui Woods launched forward, his wooden tendrils wrapping tightly around the frozen sludge, binding it securely into a solid mass. Seeing the villain restrained, Izuku blinked. The green light vanished from his eyes. He stumbled forward, gasping, dropping to his knees. The mental backlash of releasing the resonance hit him like a physical blow. He clutched his head, shivering violently as the adrenaline left his system. The sludge villain immediately slumped, its form losing rigidity as Kamui's Wood squeezed it tight, returning it to a helpless puddle. The villain moaned, disoriented and terrified, having been trapped inside its own frozen body for the last 30 seconds. The fire department moved in, extinguishing the flames. The crisis was over. But as Izuku knelt on the asphalt, trying to catch his breath, he realized the atmosphere hadn't changed. The relief was there, but beneath it was a thick, heavy layer of dread. He looked up. The pro-heroes were walking toward him, but they weren't smiling. Death Arms looked furious. Kamui Woods looked wary. Empty Lady was staring at him like he was a live grenade. "What the hell were you thinking, kid?" Death Arms bellowed, grabbing Izuku by the shoulder and hauling him to his feet. "You could have gotten yourself killed. And what the hell was that quirk? You completely paralyzed him." "Mind control," Kamui Woods muttered, his wooden mask betraying no emotion, but his posture tense. He overrode the villain's motor functions. "Kid, using a psychological quirk like that in public without a license. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" "He saved him," a civilian yelled from the crowd, though their voice wavered. "The kid did what you heroes couldn't." "That's not the point." Death Arms snapped at the crowd, before turning back to Izuku. "Hero work is for professionals. You don't take the law into your own hands. Especially with a quirk that volatile. If you had lost control, or commanded him to attack us, it would have been a massacre." Izuku looked down at his feet. They were right. All Might had been right. He had saved Katsuki, but he had terrified everyone in the process. The heroes weren't praising him. They were reprimanding him for existing. A few feet away, paramedics were checking on Katsuki. The explosive boy batted them away, standing up shakily. He walked over to where Izuku was being scolded. The heroes parted slightly, expecting Katsuki to thank him. Instead, Katsuki stood in front of Izuku, his chest heaving. His face was a complex mask of fury, humiliation, and a deep, unsettling realization. "I didn't ask for your help, Deku," Katsuki snarled, his voice raw from the sludge. "I didn't need you to save me. I was fine. Don't you dare think you're better than me because you used your creepy trick." Katsuki turned around and marched away, ignoring the paramedics trailing behind him. Izuku let out a long, shuddering breath. It was a disaster. He had broken his vow, he had exposed his power, and it had changed absolutely nothing. He was still the villain in their eyes. After half an hour of lectures and police questioning, they finally let him go. The sun had set, and the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. Izuku walked home alone, his backpack slung over one shoulder. His head throbbed with a dull ache. He felt empty. He had finally used his power to save someone, and the result was exactly what he had feared. He wasn't a hero. He was just a scary kid with a scary quirk. "I'll withdraw my UA application tomorrow," he thought bleakly. "I'll look into police work. Or maybe data entry. I am here." Izuku jumped nearly out of his skin as a massive figure burst out from a nearby alleyway, striking a heroic pose under a streetlight. "All Might?" Izuku gasped, stumbling backward. "What are you doing here? I thought you were." Before he could finish, All Might deflated in a puff of steam, returning to his skeletal form. He leaned against a brick wall, coughing up a small amount of blood. "Sorry," All Might rasped, wiping his mouth. "I was following you. I had to speak with you." Izuku looked away, shame flushing his cheeks. "If you're here to yell at me for getting in the way, the other heroes already did. I know I shouldn't have done it. I know my quirk is dangerous. I'm giving up on being a hero. I am not here to scold you, young man," All Might said gently. He pushed himself off the wall and walked toward Izuku. To Izuku's absolute shock, the symbol of peace stopped a few feet away and bowed his head perfectly straight, a deep, respectful bow. "I am here to apologize," All Might said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to thank you?" Izuku's jaw dropped. "What? Why?" All Might stood back up, looking Izuku directly in the eyes. "Because earlier today, I gave you the advice of a hypocrite. I told you to be realistic. I told you that your power inspired fear, but when I stood in that crowd, watching that villain suffocate that boy, I did nothing. My time limit was up. I was useless." All Might placed a hand over his heart. "But you, a middle schooler with no physical enhancements, A boy who has been told his whole life his power is evil. You didn't hesitate. You ran into the fire while the professionals stood and watched. You used the terrifying power with absolute, perfect restraint to save a life. Izuku's eyes widened. Tears, hot and fast, began to well up in his eyes. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days. All Might continued, his voice regaining a fraction of its former boom, echoing in the quiet street. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku let out a strangled sob. He fell to his knees, his hands clutching his chest. 10 years of holding back, 10 years of being called a monster, 10 years of isolation, it all shattered in an instant. You asked me if someone with a villain's quirk could be a hero, All Might said, looking down at the weeping boy. I was wrong. A power is only as villainous as the heart of the one who wields it. You didn't steal that boy's freedom to harm him. You stole the villain's freedom to save him. That is the essence of true heroism. All Might smiled, the kindest, most genuine smile Izuku had ever seen. You can become a hero, Izuku cried. He bowed his head to the pavement and wept, the heavy, suffocating weight he had carried since childhood finally lifting from his shoulders. All Might waited patiently until Izuku's sobs subsided to hiccups. He knelt down, putting a skeletal hand on Izuku's shoulder. However, All Might said, his tone turning serious. The heroes were right about one thing. Your quirk is dangerous. It requires absolute mental discipline, and if you face an opponent whose mind you cannot connect with, or robots in an entrance exam, you will be defenseless. Izuku wiped his eyes, looking up. I know. I've been studying martial arts for years to compensate. But I don't know if it's enough for you. It's a start, but you need more than a dojo can teach you, All Might said. His eyes burned with a fierce, brilliant light. You need to learn how to fight like a pro. You need to learn how to wield capture weapons, how to use psychology in combat, and how to carry the burden of a power that frightens people. All Might stood up, offering his hand. I cannot give you my power, young man. But I can give you my experience. If you are willing, I will train you. I will teach you everything I know about combat, tactics, and what it truly means to be a symbol. We have 10 months before the UA entrance exam. Izuku looked at the outstretched hand. He looked at the frail, broken man who stood before him, not as an invincible god, but as a true mentor. Izuku reached up and took All Might's hand, his grip firm and unyielding. I will work harder than anyone else, Izuku said, his voice filled with a quiet, terrifying resolve. I accept. All Might grinned. Then rest up tonight, kid. Because tomorrow, we begin building the mastermind who will take the hero world by storm. The 10 months leading up to the UA High School entrance exam were, without a doubt, the most grueling of Izuku Midoriya's life. When All Might had promised to train him, Izuku had expected a regimen focused on physical conditioning. What he received was a master class in asymmetrical warfare. Your quirk is a psychological nuclear weapon, young Midoriya, All Might had told him on their first day at Dagoba Municipal Beach, a coastline choked with illegal dumping and rusted appliances. The skeletal hero stood atop a broken refrigerator, the wind tugging at his oversized clothes. But against an opponent without a mind, like a drone, a robot, or a villain with a cognitive nullifying mutation, you are effectively quirkless. To survive, you must become a ghost on the battlefield. You need a weapon that extends your physical reach without compromising your mobility. That weapon arrived in a sleek black lockbox 3 days later. Izuku had opened it to find yards of pale, metallic cloth. It was a capturing weapon, a binding cloth woven from a proprietary blend of carbon fiber and a specialized metal alloy. It was nearly identical to the signature weapon of the underground pro hero, Eraserhead. I had to pull a few strings with the support gear company to get this prototype, All Might explained, watching as Izuku reverently ran his fingers over the material. It responds subtly to the user's kinetic energy and momentum. It will take months just to learn how to keep from tangling yourself in it. But if you master it, you can trap enemies, swing from structures, and disable opponents without ever needing to look them in the eye. For 10 months, Izuku lived and breathed combat. He woke up at 4 a.m., running miles along the beach while manipulating the heavy cloth around his arms and neck, learning how to make it snap like a whip or coil like a python. He incorporated the capture scarf into the judo and aikido he had learned over the years, transforming his martial arts from simple self-defense into a highly aggressive, trapping-based defensive style. All Might didn't hold back. He couldn't spar with Izuku using his quirk, but the former symbol of peace possessed decades of combat experience. He taught Izuku how to read the hips to predict a strike, how to use the environment to blind an opponent, and how to strike nerve clusters to paralyze a limb. Simultaneously, Dagobah Beach was cleared. Izuku used the heavy trash, refrigerators, engine blocks, rusted trucks, as targets. He would sprint through the maze of junk, using the scarf to latch onto heavy objects, utilizing centrifugal force to hurl a microwave into a rusted-out car. But the physical training was only half the battle. All Might also tested Izuku's mind. During their spars, All Might would throw complex tactical scenarios at him. Hostage situation in a bank, 3 armed villains, one with a sight-based quirk, 2 blind spots. What do you do? Izuku had to answer while dodging strikes and parrying with his scarf. It was during these sessions that All Might truly understood the terrifying depth of the boy's intellect. Izuku didn't just calculate vectors and quirk interactions, he calculated people. He analyzed emotional states, predicting how fear, anger, or arrogance would make a villain move. By the time February arrived, Dagobah Beach was a pristine stretch of white sand. And Izuku Midoriya was no longer the trembling boy who had cried in the alleyway. The morning of the UA entrance exam was crisp and violently cold. Frost clung to the edges of the massive, gleaming gates of UA High School. Izuku stood at the bottom of the brick pathway leading to the main building. He wore his black middle school uniform, the heavy, pale capture scarf coiled securely around his neck, hidden partially by the high collar of his jacket. He took a deep, centering breath, the cold air filling his lungs. Out of my way, Deku. The voice was a low, aggressive growl. Izuku didn't flinch. He calmly stepped to the side, turning to look at Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki looked the same as always, hands shoved deep into his pockets, an arrogant scowl firmly etched onto his face. But the dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted since the sludge villain incident. Katsuki no longer yelled at him in the halls. He no longer actively sought to humiliate him. Instead, he treated Izuku like an unexploded bomb. He kept his distance, his crimson eyes wary, fundamentally disturbed by the absolute power Izuku had wielded that day. Katsuki stopped, glaring sideways at him. Don't think you're hot shit just because you did a parlor trick 10 months ago. You're walking into a slaughterhouse today. You can't brainwash a machine. I know, Kaken, Izuku replied evenly, his voice devoid of the stutter that had plagued his childhood. Good luck in there. Katsuki's eye twitched. He hated that calm. He hated the way Izuku looked at him now, not with fear, but with an unnerving, clinical understanding. I don't need luck, Katsuki spat, storming past him toward the entrance. Izuku watched him go, adjusting the scarf around his neck. He began the walk up the long pathway. He was so focused on visualizing the scarf mechanics that he didn't notice his foot catching the edge of a slightly uneven paving stone. His center of gravity pitched forward. I can catch myself, he thought, his martial arts training instinctively preparing him to tuck and roll. But before he hit the ground, his body suddenly lost all weight. He hovered in the air, his nose an inch from the concrete, his limbs flailing slightly in the zero-gravity environment. Are you okay? Izuku was gently rotated upright by a girl with a round, cheerful face, permanently flushed cheeks, and short, bobbed brown hair. She pressed her fingertips together, and gravity violently reasserted itself. Izuku landed lightly on his feet. Sorry I used my quirk on you without asking, the girl said, rubbing the back of her neck with a nervous laugh. It's just, it would be bad luck to fall before the exam even starts, right? I'm Achiko Uraraka. Izuku looked at her. Her emotional state was a bright, overwhelming cocktail of anxiety, excitement, and genuine kindness. It was so potent that Izuku actually felt the subtle hum of commanding resonance tickle the back of his mind. He quickly blinked, suppressing his quirk before the connection could form. Thank you, Uraraka-san, Izuku said, offering a small, polite bow. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I appreciate the save. Midoriya! Nice to meet you. Let's do our best today. She gave a determined pump of her fist before hurrying off toward the auditorium. Izuku watched her, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. It had been a long time since someone his age had looked at him without fear. He filed away her quirk, gravity manipulation through physical contact, in his mental database and proceeded inside. The orientation in the auditorium was a sensory overload. The voice hero, Present Mike, stood at the DJ booth on stage, screaming into the microphone with enough force to rattle Izuku's teeth. The presentation was exactly as Izuku had predicted in his notebooks, a practical combat exam. 10 minutes. An urban mock city environment filled with robotic villains, 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers, Izuku noted, his pencil flying across a fresh page in his notebook. Destruction equals points. But there's a catch. And finally, the 0-pointer. Present Mike bellowed, a holographic image of a massive, tank-like robot appearing on the screen behind him. It's an obstacle. If you see it run, it yields no points and will only crush your dreams. Izuku narrowed his eyes. A massive obstacle with 0-point value? In a test designed to evaluate hero potential? That doesn't make sense. Pro heroes are evaluated on combat, yes, but also on rescue, collateral damage mitigation, and public safety. If there is a massive threat that gives no points, it's a test of character. A test of flight or fight. He tapped his pencil against his chin. He had drawn Battle Center B. He would be separated from Katsuki. That was good. He needed to operate without his volatile childhood friend interfering. 30 minutes later, Izuku stood before the towering, imposing gates of Battle Center B. It was a perfect, full-scale replica of a city district, complete with skyscrapers, alleyways, and intersections. Surrounding him was a sea of anxious teenagers. Some were stretching, some were manifesting their quirks, warming up engines on their calves or sparking electricity from their fingertips. Izuku stood in the middle of the crowd, his eyes closed, mentally mapping the blueprints of the city he had memorized from the UA informational pamphlet. Start! Present Mike's voice echoed from loudspeakers hidden across the city. The crowd of examinees froze for a split second, confused by the lack of a countdown. What's the matter? There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! Izuku didn't hesitate. While the other students were still processing the command, Izuku's eyes snapped open. He launched himself forward, his legs driving with explosive, trained power. He shot past the heavy steel doors before anyone else had even taken a step, disappearing into the concrete labyrinth. He sprinted down the main avenue, his eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways. Clank! 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 A robotic voice synthesized from a speaker. Target acquired. 3 1-pointers wheeled out from an alleyway to his left, their single red optics locking onto him. They raised their machine gun-like appendages. Izuku didn't slow down. He reached up, grabbing the ends of his capture scarf. The robots fired a volley of rubber bullets. Izuku dropped into a baseball slide, the projectiles whistling inches above his face. As he slid across the pavement, he lashed out with his left arm. The scarf snapped forward like an angry viper, wrapping securely around the front axle of the leading 1-pointer. Using his own forward momentum, Izuku violently yanked the scarf. The robot's wheels locked. Physics did the rest. The machine flipped forward, crashing heavily into the asphalt and exploding into a shower of sparks and metal plating. Izuku used the tension on the scarf to pull himself back to his feet, instantly flowing into a sprint. The remaining 2 1-pointers tracked him. Their tracking speed is slow. Their turning radius is wide, Izuku analyzed in a fraction of a second. He didn't attack them directly. Instead, he threw his scarf upward, wrapping it around the sturdy iron bracket of a street lamp above the robots. He sprinted toward them, jumped, and used the scarf as a fulcrum to swing his entire body weight in a wide arc over their heads. As he swung over them, the 2 robots turned their weapons to track him in the air. Wait for it. They fired. But Izuku had already released the scarf, dropping out of their line of sight. The robots, facing each other with Izuku previously between them, fired their rubber bullets directly into each other's central processing units. Both machines sparked, sputtered, and collapsed. 3 points, Izuku thought, retracting his scarf with a flick of his wrist. He kept moving. It was a solid start, but it was incredibly inefficient. Over the next 4 minutes, Izuku fought like a demon. He used the environment to his absolute advantage. He baited a three-pointer into charging him, only to dodge at the last second, letting the heavy machine smash into a brick wall. He used his scarf to pull the exposed wiring from the back of a two-pointer's neck, short-circuiting it. By minute 5, he had accumulated 15 points. He was also exhausted. Izuku leaned against the concrete barrier, gasping for breath. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. His muscles screamed. He was fighting machines designed to be destroyed by explosions, lasers, and super strength. Doing it with physics, martial arts, and a scarf was taking an immense physical toll. He peered over the barrier. A boy with lasers shooting from his navel blasted 3 two-pointers into scrap metal in seconds. He just got 6 points by standing still, Izuku noted grimly. I had to risk my life for 3. He was falling behind. 15 points wouldn't be enough to pass, not when people with flashy emitter quirks were racking up scores in the 40s and 50s. He needed a multiplier. He needed more firepower. A loud scream snapped Izuku out of his thoughts. He looked down the intersection. A group of 3 students had been cornered by a cluster of 7 robots, a mix of 2 and 3-pointers. Izuku recognized one of the students as the boy who had berated him earlier in the auditorium, a tall teenager with engines protruding from his calves. The other 2 were a boy whose arms were coated in thick, jagged stone, and a girl who was desperately shooting small, ineffective sparks of electricity at the advancing machines. The engine boy, Ida, Izuku recalled from the seating chart, was fast, but his movements were strictly linear. He had charged a 3-pointer, but his foot had been caught by a 2-pointer's mechanical claw. He was pinned. The stone-armed boy was panicking, swinging wildly and blindly, his strikes glancing off the robot's armor because he wasn't hitting their weak points. The electric girl was backing up, tears in her eyes, her quirk completely useless against the insulated plating of the machines. They were going to be eliminated. Izuku's eyes hardened. An idea, wild, dangerous, and incredibly controversial, sparked in his mind. All Might said my quirk inspires fear. He said I need a weapon. But what if my weapon isn't a scarf? What if my weapon is strategy itself? Izuku leaped over the barrier. He didn't attack the robots. Instead, he landed directly in the center of the 3 terrified students, putting his back to the advancing machines. He threw his arms out, his capture scarf whipping around in a protective circle, knocking the front line of robots back just enough to buy them 10 seconds. What are you doing? Ida yelled, struggling to free his leg from the crushed 2-pointer. Flee. You cannot take them all. I'm not going to, Izuku said, his voice cutting through the panic with terrifying, icy calm. He turned his head, looking directly at the 3 of them. The atmosphere around Izuku seemed to shift. The frantic energy of the battlefield vanished, replaced by an oppressive, heavy gravity. Listen to me very carefully, Izuku commanded, his voice vibrating with the subtle undertone of his quirk. You are about to fail this exam. You are uncoordinated, you are panicking, and your quirks are being utilized inefficiently. Who the hell do you think? The stone-armed boy started, anger flashing in his eyes. I can save you, Izuku interrupted, his gaze locking onto the stone-armed boy. The boy froze, feeling the sudden, undeniable weight of Izuku's presence in his mind. My quirk is tactical telemetry, mind control. If you give me permission to link with your minds, I will take over your motor functions. You will not become zombies. You will retain all your physical strength, your quirks, and your reflexes, but I will act as the central nervous system. I will coordinate your bodies to fight as a single, flawless unit. The 3 students stared at him in absolute horror. Mind control? The electric girl shrieked. No way. That's a villain's trick. It is a violation of autonomy. Ida declared, his face pale. The robots recovered. A 3-pointer raised its massive missile pod, aiming directly at the group. You have 5 seconds before those missiles fire and you all go home with 0 points, Izuku said, his voice entirely devoid of panic. He let the brilliant, swirling emerald light ignite in his eyes. It cast an eerie, ethereal glow in the shadow of the buildings. I vow on my life, I will not force you. I require your consent. Will you trust me? The missiles locked on. The targeting lasers painted the ground at their feet. The stone-armed boy looked at the robots, then looked into Izuku's swirling green eyes. He saw no malice. He saw only absolute, unshakable certainty. "Do it!" the boy screamed. "Me too!" the electric girl sobbed. Ida gritted his teeth, his rigid morality warring with his burning desire to pass. But as the three-pointer's pod clicked open, his survival instinct won out. "I consent! Look at my eyes!" Izuku roared. The three of them met his gaze. Snap! The emotional bridge, forged in the fires of mutual panic, desperation, and sudden, blind trust, locked into place. Izuku didn't just feel a string this time. He felt three massive, heavy steel cables slam into the base of his skull. The sheer influx of sensory data was staggering. He could feel Ida's trapped leg, the heavy, cumbersome weight of the rock arms, the static electricity buzzing under the girl's skin. He didn't fight the sensation. He embraced it. He became the spider at the center of the web. The three-pointer fired. Izuku didn't move his own body. He stood perfectly still, his eyes glowing like twin emerald suns, his consciousness expanding outward. Ida. Engine burst, right calf, maximum torque. Izuku didn't speak the words aloud. The command was fired instantly through the mental link. Ida's body reacted with a speed and precision he had never achieved in his life. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think about the pain. His right calf engine roared to life with blinding blue fire, ripping his trapped leg free from the mechanical claw and blasting his body out of the blast radius of the missiles. The missiles impacted the ground, exploding in a massive cloud of fire and smoke. Stone arms. Step forward. Brace. Electric girl. Hand on his back. Discharge your current into his armor. Through the smoke, the rock-armed boy stepped forward. His posture was no longer panicking and sloppy. It was a perfect, textbook martial arts horse stance. The electric girl stepped behind him, pressing her palms against his back. She unleashed a massive, blinding wave of electricity. Because the rock armor was an earth-based insulator, it absorbed and stored the electrical charge, turning the boy into a massive, walking capacitor. Ida. Flank left. Sweep the legs of the two-pointers. Stone arms. Release the charge on the three-pointer. To the judges watching in the observation room, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The three disorganized, panicked teenagers suddenly moved with the synchronized lethality of a Black Ops wetwork team. Ida moved like a blur, entirely bypassing his usual rigid, robotic running style. Under Izuku's control, his center of gravity was lowered, his movements fluid and devastating. He swept low, his engine-powered kicks shattering the knee joints of three two-pointers in less than 2 seconds, dropping them to the ground. Simultaneously, the rock-armed boy lunged at the massive three-pointer. He didn't swing wildly. He targeted the exposed, unarmored joint connecting the torso to the chassis. He slammed his fist into the gap. The stored electrical charge erupted from his rocky skin, surging directly into the robot's mainframe. The three-pointer seized, overloaded, and detonated violently. Izuku stood in the center of the carnage, untouched. His mind was a supercomputer, processing vectors, cooldowns, and spatial awareness at a frightening speed. 6 targets remaining in sector, Izuku broadcasted to his hive mind. Formation Delta. Ida, act as mobility. Stone arms act as the hammer. Electric girl, provide suppressing fire to their optics. We are going hunting. For the next 4 minutes, Battle Center B became Izuku Midoriya's personal chessboard. His puppets did not feel violated. It was a bizarre, euphoric sensation for them. They could feel their own bodies moving, they could see the destruction they were causing, but the burden of choice, the hesitation of fear, and the inefficiency of poor technique were completely stripped away. They were functioning at 100% of their theoretical potential, guided by a master tactician who saw the battlefield from a top-down perspective. Izuku used Ida to ferry the slower stone-armed boy across the battlefield. When they encountered a cluster of one-pointers, Izuku commanded the electric girl to throw small, precise sparks to blind the robot's sensors, while Ida and the stone boy dismantled them with surgical precision. Izuku didn't just steal points, he orchestrated a slaughter. He was careful, however, to distribute the killing blows evenly among the 3 bodies under his control, ensuring they were all racking up massive scores. He also used his own capture scarf to assist, tripping robots to set up the others for the finish. By minute 9, the 4 of them had cleared 2 entire city blocks. There wasn't a functional robot in sight. High above the mock cities, in the darkened, monitor-filled observation room of UA, the pro-hero faculty sat in stunned silence. The screens displayed feeds from all the battle centers, but the primary monitor was entirely focused on the green-haired boy standing motionless in the center of a coordinated massacre. "What in the world are we watching?" asked Midnight, leaning forward in her chair, her eyes wide. Did that boy's quirk just manifest multiple personality disorder in those 3? No, a gruff, tired voice answered from the corner. Eraserhead sat half-zipped in his yellow sleeping bag, his bloodshot eyes glued to the screen. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely fascinated. Look at his eyes. Look at his posture. He's not doing anything physical. He's pulling their strings. Nizu, the principal of UA, a strange creature that resembled a cross between a bear, a mouse, and a dog, took a sip of tea. Fascinating. A mind control quirk. But historically, psychological quirks severely degrade the victim's motor functions. Shinso in Battle Center C is demonstrating that currently, his targets can barely walk in a straight line, let alone fight. He's not just controlling them, All Might spoke up, his voice booming slightly in the small room. He stood in the back, gripping the railing, pride swelling in his chest. He is optimizing them. He has taken over their higher cognitive functions and replaced their combat instincts with his own. He is fighting 3 different battles, with 3 different quirks, simultaneously. But the ethics, Snipe murmured from beneath his mask. Mind-controlling fellow examinees? Isn't that against the spirit of the exam? He asked for consent. Aizawa countered sharply, tapping a button on his console to replay the audio feed of Izuku's proposition. The room listened as Izuku explicitly promised not to force them, requiring eye contact and agreement to establish the link. Aizawa grinned, a terrifying, feral expression. He found the loophole. The exam prohibits sabotaging other students. It says nothing about teaming up. He didn't sabotage them. He saved them from failing and turned them into a weapon. That is pure, unadulterated rationality. I want that kid in my class. Wait. President Mike suddenly shouted, pointing at the master console. Time is almost up. We need to deploy the obstacles. Niza nodded, his small paw hovering over a large red button. Let us see how our young puppet master handles a threat that cannot be controlled or easily broken. Niza pressed the button. Back in Battle Center B, Izuku felt the ground violently shudder. He immediately halted his team. The connection was giving him a massive headache. His nose beginning to bleed slightly from the sheer neurological strain of sustaining 3 distinct motor cortex overrides for so long. Hold positions, Izuku commanded mentally. Something big is coming. At the end of the main avenue, a shadow fell over the buildings. The mock city blocks literally cracked and shattered as a mechanical monstrosity hauled itself out of a subterranean hangar. The 0-pointer. It was the size of a skyscraper. Its treads crushed entire buildings into dust. Its massive, red optic glared down at the fleeing examinees like an angry god. Izuku's breath hitched. That's not an obstacle. That's a natural disaster. Panic erupted among the examinees. Everyone who had been fighting nearby turned and fled in absolute terror. We are withdrawing, Izuku transmitted to his team. Objective complete. Fall back to the entrance. He turned, prepared to lead his team away. But as he scanned the destruction the robot was causing, his enhanced situational awareness caught something. 50 yards away, near the base of the advancing 0-pointer, a piece of debris from a shattered building had pinned someone to the ground. It was the girl from earlier. Uraraka. She was struggling desperately, trying to touch the concrete slab to remove its gravity, but her arm was pinned awkwardly beneath it. The 0-pointer's massive tread was rolling directly toward her. She had less than 30 seconds before she was crushed. Izuku stopped. Commander? Ida's thought echoed in Izuku's mind, a reflection of the boy's internal confusion. Why have we stopped? Izuku looked at the 0-pointer. Then he looked at Uraraka. If he released the connection now, his 3 teammates would run. They would be safe. He could try to save Uraraka himself, but with his physical limits, he wouldn't be fast enough to move the debris and get out of the way. He needed them. But risking their lives against a zero-pointer went against his vow. He had promised to keep them safe. Izuku made a decision. He didn't issue a command. He opened a two-way emotional channel. Listen to me, Izuku's voice echoed in the minds of Ida, the stone boy, and the electric girl. It wasn't the cold, calculating voice of the tactician. It was the desperate, pleading voice of Izuku Midoriya. There is a girl trapped near the treads. I cannot save her alone. The exam is about points, but heroism is about saving lives. I will not force you to fight this thing. If you want to run, I will sever the connection right now. Silence hung in the mental link for a fraction of a second. Then, a surge of emotion flooded back into Izuku's brain. From Ida, a profound sense of shame for not seeing the trapped girl, followed by a blazing, righteous determination. From the stone boy, a solid, unyielding courage. From the electric girl, fear, but a fierce, biting spark of defiance. Let us, Ida's thought rang clear and true. Izuku's eyes flared with blinding light. The connection deepened, locking them together not as puppets, but as a true, synchronized team. Engaging the zero-pointer, Izuku commanded. Stone arms, I need structural damage. Ida, you are the delivery system. Electric girl, you are the payload. We are going to blow its knee. The team moved. Ida sprinted toward the zero-pointer, grabbing the electric girl and the stone boy by their collars. His engine screamed, burning white-hot as he pushed his quirk far past its safe limits, hauling their combined weight across the ruined street at blinding speed. They reached the base of the massive robot. Now, Ida hurled the stone boy forward. The boy shifted his mass, driving his hardened rock fists directly into the joint of the robot's massive ankle. The stone shattered against the heavy armor, but it dented the plating, creating a fractional gap in the armor. Strike! The electric girl leaped off Ida's shoulders, landing directly on the dented armor. She screamed, unleashing every single volt of electricity her body could produce, directly into the exposed joint. The zero-pointer's legs sparked violently. The servos whined, the massive gears grinding as the localized electrical overload seized the knee joint. The robot's momentum betrayed it. With its right leg completely locked, the top half of the skyscraper-sized machine pitched forward. It began to fall, tilting away from where Uraraka was trapped, crashing into the buildings on the opposite side of the street with an earth-shattering boom. Dust and debris exploded into the air, creating a massive shockwave that knocked Izuku off his feet. He rolled, his capture scarf whipping out to grab a street lamp, arresting his momentum. He didn't wait for the dust to clear. He sprinted into the smoke, arriving at Uraraka's side. The zero-pointer was down, but the debris pinning her was still there. Ida. Stone arms. Two figures blurred through the smoke. Under Izuku's perfect coordination, the stone-armed boy grabbed the concrete slab, lifting it with a synchronized heave. Ida grabbed Uraraka, pulling her smoothly from beneath the trap. Time's up. Present Mix's voice blared across the battlefield. A loud siren wailed, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku stood in the dust, panting heavily. The blood from his nose was now a steady trickle. The migraine behind his eyes felt like a physical knife. He closed his eyes, cutting the emotional tether. Release. The mental cable snapped. Instantly Ida, the stone boy, and the electric girl collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The sudden return of their autonomy, combined with the sheer physical exhaustion of pushing their bodies to their absolute limits, hit them all at once. Izuku staggered, falling to his knees. The world spun. He looked over at the three of them. He braced himself. He expected them to look at him with the same horror and disgust Katsuki always had. He expected them to scream at him for violating their minds. Ida pushed himself up on trembling arms. He looked at the destroyed zero-pointer, then at Uraraka, who was clutching her bruised arm but otherwise safe. Finally, Ida looked at Izuku. The tall boy with engines in his legs didn't look disgusted. He looked profoundly awestruck. Midoriya-kun, Ida breathed, his voice hoarse. That was... I have never felt such clarity in my life. Your tactical processing, it is beyond anything I have ever experienced. The electric girl sat up, rubbing her head. I was terrified at first, but it didn't feel like I was a zombie. It felt like I was in the zone. Like I couldn't make a mistake. The stone-armed boy grinned, a massive, exhausted smile. We wrecked that entire block, man. That was incredible. Izuku stared at them, his heart pounding in his chest. They weren't afraid of him. They didn't see him as a villain. They saw him as a leader. For the first time in his life, his quirk hadn't driven people away. It had brought them together. Tears pricked Izuku's eyes. He wiped his bloody nose on his sleeve and offered them a weak, genuine smile. We did it together. Thank you for trusting me. 1 week later, Izuku sat at his desk in his bedroom, staring blankly at the wall. The wait had been agonizing. He had analyzed his performance 1,000 times. He knew his team had destroyed dozens of robots, but he didn't know how Yui scored assisted kills. He hadn't landed a single final blow while linked with them. By the strict definition of the rules, his individual score was only the 15 points he had earned before the link. 15 points was a failing grade. Izuku! Inko Midoriya burst into the room, her eyes wide, holding a standard white envelope with the Yui wax seal. It's here! It came! She placed the envelope on his desk and practically fled the room, unable to handle the anxiety. Izuku's hands trembled as he picked up the envelope. He carefully broke the seal. A small metal disc slid out, landing on the wood of his desk. Instantly, a holographic projection sprang to life. I am here as a projection. All Might's voice boomed from the hologram. Izuku gasped. All Might? Why is he working at UA? Surprise, young Midoriya. All Might smiled warmly, dressed in a sharp yellow suit. I am joining the faculty at UA High School, and it is my great pleasure to deliver your results. The hologram shifted to show a scoreboard. On the written exam, you scored a near-perfect 98%. Excellent work. However, the practical exam is where things became complicated. Izuku's heart sank into his stomach. You accumulated 15 villain points on your own, All Might said, his tone turning serious. However, the judges reviewed the footage of your unique tactical formation. A video feed played next to All Might, showing Izuku standing calmly while Ida, the stone boy, and the electric girl dismantled the robots in perfect synchronization. UA is a school that values innovation, All Might continued. While you did not strike the final blow, your quirk was the indisputable catalyst for the destruction of 45 points worth of villains. The judges voted unanimously to award you tactical assist points, granting you half the value of the kills you orchestrated. Izuku's eyes widened. Half of 45. That's 22.5 points. Plus my 15. That's 37.5. Is that enough? But that is not all. All Might's smile returned, softer this time. An exam that only grades on destruction is a flawed exam. How can a hero course reject those who save others? The video shifted again, showing Izuku turning back toward the zero-pointer, sending the mental command to save Uraraka. Rescue points. All Might declared. Given by a panel of judges. For utilizing your quirk not to command destruction, but to ask for cooperation to save a fellow examinee. Izuku Midoriya, you are awarded 60 rescue points. The numbers on the screen tallied. Total score, 97.5 points. Rank first place. You showed us that true power is not just about controlling a situation, but elevating those around you, All Might said, pointing a finger directly at the camera. Come, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The hologram faded, leaving the room in silence. Izuku sat perfectly still. He looked at his hands. He looked at the capture scarf draped over his chair. He had done it. He hadn't just passed. He had dominated the exam, and he had done it without compromising his morals, without stripping anyone of their humanity. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't a monster. He was Izuku Midoriya. And he was going to be a hero.